we'll just give it another minute. So the goal is keep this as discussion based as possible. So I'm just going to be running through the statistics that came out from February. Just kind of give us an idea in terms of what we're seeing in the data. So if you guys have questions at any point in time, don't hesitate to unmute yourself and, chime in at any point in time. Don't have to wait for the end. And for anyone who's just sort of watching on either Facebook or YouTube Live, Evan's going to be monitoring those chat messages. So don't hesitate to throw a comment or question in there, and he'll get those read off as they come in, so we can kind of answer questions as we go. So we're about 12:02, so why don't we just go ahead and start kicking things off with the data. So if this is your first time joining us, thank you for watching. We're still kind of playing with our technology a little bit, so we're trying again something a little bit new. So if we have any technical issues, I'm going to apologize ahead of time, but we're hoping this time we've got it all set up. Evan's done an awesome job trying to, troubleshoot everything ahead of time. So I think we should be in a better spot now. Okay, home values. So this is going to be, even though we're in March, data is always about a month behind. So we're looking at the February data for El Paso County. And this is all specific to residential homes. So it's going to include single families, townhomes, and condos. Average price of $524 and median price of $458. Personally, I would always recommend looking more at the median price. That's kind of a better metric to follow. The average prices can kind of skew up quite a bit, and will typically always be higher than median because of those multi-million-dollar homes that sell. So for the rest of us normal people who are not buying multi-million-dollar homes, the median price is really a better metric to be following in terms of what sort of numbers we're seeing. So median price being that 458, and that's up about 1.9% year over year, which is actually not too bad given the market we've been in. Let me go to the next slide. So this is the average over the last 12 months. So 468 is where we've been from a rolling 12-month average. The fact that we're still trending upwards is a good sign. I'm still very worried about what the rest of this year could look like in terms of home values. I'm definitely not predicting any sort of major home value increases in 2025. And I'd say there's even potential risk of there being a little bit of a price correction and staying pretty flat or even a little bit of a decline. Just hard to say right now. I know we did have a good interest rate drop a couple weeks ago, which will help the affordability scale for buyers. So I think that drop in interest rate will actually help maintain those values in terms of at least where they're at. But again, the drop in interest rate wasn't, I'd say, enough to really move the needle or get too many people excited. So if you are, and of course, market data is always different depending on which side of the equation you're on in terms of what matters to me is the question. So if you're a buyer or thinking about buying, I would really try to think about buying a home this year. I personally just bought a home a few months ago. I feel like home values are still pretty depressed. And I also don't really see them going down a ton. I'm not anticipating a big drop off in pricing. So I'd say they're probably as good as they're going to be for a while. And we can always refinance our mortgage rates, in a few years when those come down, or hopefully come down. No guarantees of that, of course, but I think the general anticipation is that they will come down eventually. So I think I locked in close to about a 7%. So not a really good interest rate by any stretch of the imagination. I also sold points, which gave me a higher interest rate, which is the opposite of what most people do, where they buy points to get a lower interest rate. I just went ahead and sold those points to save some money on closing costs, and just going to go ahead and plan on refinancing in under 2 years. Essentially my general plan. Just because I know I kind of unfortunately locked at a bad time. And it is what it is. But I've got 2 years to gauge that interest rate drop. So I feel like I'm okay there. But again, if you're thinking about buying, now's a good time to buy. If you're on the side of selling, I would not try and keep your prices too high. I would definitely be trying to move the needle pretty quickly. So for example, if I had one of my flips on the market right now, I'd probably be adjusting my price down every single week depending on market activity. So market activity being number of showings I'm getting, number of phone calls as the agent is receiving, how many people are looking at it online, and ultimately, of course, where are the offers coming in. So if I'm not getting offers, I'd probably be making small changes every week. If I'm not getting any activity across the board, I'd probably be making pretty big changes. Just seeing the amount of new listing inventory come on. So let me up that slide really quick. So in terms of listing inventory, you can definitely see we've got a pretty big widening gap between what's actually selling and our active listings. So in February, we had almost 2,800 listings and only about 670 of those sold. So if you've got a home in the market and you want to sell, you've got to be competitive, because if you're not, the next guy is. And as we get into the summer selling season here, we're only going to keep seeing that total active listing number growing. And as that number continues to grow, you as a seller have more competition in terms of other sellers on the market for what is currently a smaller demand of buyers. So that we just don't have as many buyers as sellers right now. So of course, not all of those listings are selling. There's a big chunk that are just going to drop off entirely, that are going to go into either expired or canceled status and not come back on the market. So new listings as of February, about 1,068 new listings. So you do see a little bit of a drop, see my little mouse thing. So you kind of see this drop right here. That is not at all surprising for February. In fact, you kind of see that pretty consistently year over year. There, January tends to have a pretty big spike up in listings from December. February, usually not so much, but it's pretty always consistent in terms of, you see these big spikes after February as we get into March, and then new listings go up April and May. So definitely, if your property is already on the market, I would definitely be trying to price it pretty aggressively to ensure that you're getting your home sold before that total listing activity or new listing activity continues to grow and make a wider gap between the total listings and number of listings that are selling. So in terms of that percentage of home selling only being 24%. So again, that means we've got 76% of home sellers who are keeping their listing on the market, from months prior. I was just looking at a listing yesterday, and I was on the market for over a year at this point in time. So, it's if you're holding out for those high prices, I just wouldn't. I'd say you're not doing yourself any favors. You might as well take the home off the market if you're not committed to selling. People are just not, submitting lowball offers because there's better opportunities for them out there for the other sellers who are a little more motivated to be in that, to get their home sold. So you usually refer to the 4 Ds when it comes to motivation from sellers. So we've got death, divorce, diapers, and demotions or promotions. So there are always reasons as to why people have to be selling. And those people who are, let's just say, more incentivized, whether they like it or not, they're going to be dropping their price a lot faster and harder to get their home under contract. So you've got to play the game in order to get your property sold. I will say what's not reflecting these numbers is we are starting to see, from a national standpoint, a uptick in defaulting mortgages for FHA and VA buyers, or homeowners, I should say, at this point. So the typical foreclosure process can take 6 months from when people start defaulting. So usually they miss a payment and they're going to get a notice in the mail. Then they're going to probably miss a second, maybe a third payment. and then they're going to keep getting notices in the mail. At some point in time, the lender is going to send the homeowner what's called a notice of election and demand, which is the beginning process of the foreclosure on that property. And from there, there's a state mandate that you can't sell for, I think it's less than about 117 days. So it takes a while to get through that process. I do watch the foreclosure market every month or every week, I'm sorry, here for El Paso County. I'd say on average, I'm only seeing about 2 to 3 properties getting foreclosed on each week, which is about what it's been for a few years now. The one difference in the trend I'm seeing is that the loans are often going back to the plaintiff. So the plaintiff in this case is actually the mortgage originator. So, I'd say 6 months ago and beyond, a third-party auction bidder would usually get the property because there was enough equity in the property to make it a good deal. But like I think in yesterday's, there was 3 properties that got foreclosed on. All 3 went back to the bank, and then it's going to take, however long they take, which is usually a period of months, to cycle that property through to get it back into on the market as an REO listing. So those are going to be, VA listed homes or VA, I think they're called VA vendees, or, HUD foreclosure is another one. So I think we're going to start seeing more of those HUD homes and foreclosure homes, REO homes, come on the market. But again, that may not happen until later this summer or fall, as they just have to take some time to work through the cycle. So again, if you're trying to sell, I'd definitely be trying to get that home sold before a lot of those start hitting the market, because that's just going to be competition against you. Those banks are significantly more motivated to get those properties off their books than your average homeowner. All right, days on market coming down to 67. Again, not at all surprised there. This is just going to be an average. So pretty typical trending in terms of, end of year, December, usually going to be our high points. So the fact that it's coming down right here is not surprising. So, and 67 days is still plenty long for most sellers to get pretty anxious. So just know that if you're on the market now, it's pretty normal to be on the market for a while. But again, that's average. So you got plenty of people who are much, on the long end of that average. But I would encourage people, if you're selling, try and be on a shorter end of the average and work that price pretty aggressively. Because again, I think this will be an interesting year, and I know I personally would not be wanting to sell properties if you don't have to. Months of inventory about 4.2. Again, kind of coming down just a little bit. Months of inventory just meaning that if the number of homes sold based on the total current active listing, how long would it take for all of those homes to sell? It'd be 4.2 months. That's assuming that no homes get canceled or go into expired status, and there's no new listings. So this is just sort of a metric that helps balance or kind of give us an indication between what's considered a buyer's market and seller's market. Some people say that 6 months is a buyer's market. I'd say really once we get to about 3.5 and up, we're more in a buyer's market. So we're definitely tipping more in the buyer's market category already at 4.2, and we're definitely seeing some buyers get, I'd say, some good pricing. I wouldn't call it, steal of a deal like we had 10 years ago, but I'd say the pricing is definitely in the buyer's favor. I'd say most buyers are getting seller concessions at this point in time. I know all the sellers I'm talking to is just go ahead and budget that line item into your net sheet, so you know what you're going to be walking away with right out of the gate. Not uncommon to see somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 on the seller concession side. So again, if you're on the buying side, then certainly can't hurt to ask for that, since just about everybody's asking for it. I had one listing that went under contract last week. We'd been on the market for a little over 60 days. Finally dropped the price to a point that let's just say met market demand, and we had 3 offers come in within a 24-hour period. Even though we had 3 offers, we were still at a net offer below the current asking price. So Net offer being total offer price minus seller concessions. So if they're, let's say they're offering $100, asking for $5 back in seller concessions, and really the net is only $95 at that point. All right, sales price to list price ratio. Pretty typical here. You're always going to see everything in the high 90%. Definitely have those periods where it's a real hot market where it gets above 100. But in general, the sales price is always going to be about 99% of the current list price. So not the original list price, but the current price from when they go under contract. So what that means is that if your listing is priced too high, don't expect to get a lowball offer, and work off that. I mean, don't get me wrong. I get lowball offers on our listings all the time, but usually they're from investors who are just shotgunning out these offers. So what I'm talking about is a lowball offer that's from an actual serious buyer who wants to owner occupy it. Those buyers are out actually spending their time looking at homes that they feel are reasonably priced. So again, trying to hold out for some high price does not do the seller any favors whatsoever. All right, and then purchase price by term. So it's always kind of adjusting, but always, everything kind of stays about the same. So conventional is definitely our widest array of buyers. FHA and VA I'm going to group into one, only because if you're got a home that you want to get listed for sale, those two categories make up 48% of the total buyer pool here in El Paso County, or at least did for February. And that those numbers have held true for quite a while now. So in terms of making the property qualify for those types of loans, you got to make sure you don't have any chipped or peeling paint anywhere on the outside. If the property is older than 1978, can't have any chipped or peeling paint on the inside. Can't have any broken glass. The property's got to be in overall good condition. Can't have any outlets uncovered, stuff like that. So in order to meet those appraisal conditions, I would make sure that all those items are taken care of before you go in the market, because the last thing that a buyer wants to do with, especially an FHA and VA buyer who usually doesn't have much cash to play with, they're not going to want to risk putting an offer on a property that they don't feel like is going to appraise. And I'm not talking about appraise in terms of value. I'm talking about those appraisal conditions I just listed. So make sure that all those items are taken care of before you go in the market, because it is going to get you a higher price. Certainly the cosmetics go a really long way as well, but you definitely want to meet those appraisal conditions. And again, if listing is something you're thinking about, talk with either Max and I. We're happy to come do a free walkthrough of your home and help look for those items that might be a concern of an appraisal condition. So I've definitely worked with quite a few FHA and VA buyers, especially in this town being mostly military, where they really like the home, but the seller is stating up front that the sale is going to be as is, and while there's not much, there's only a little bit of chipped or peeling paint on the outside. Well, we don't really know what the appraiser's going to do, and so if the seller's kind of being stubborn up front about fixing things, and there's a chance that the appraisal may call it appraisal condition like that, I've seen a lot of FHA and VA buyers just say, you know what, it's not worth the risk. We'll just go put an offer on something else, because by the time we get that information, they're already going to be a couple $1,000s deep in inspection costs and paying for an appraisal. So to a lot of buyers who just don't have a whole lot of cash, they just don't want to take that risk. All right, I'm almost through all my slides, so don't hesitate to chime in if you got questions. My goal is to try and do these every month and just keep them short so that people can kind of log in during their lunch break real quick. All right, interest rates coming down to 7.67. It was a little higher last month. So again, it's not anything too exciting, but the fact that it is coming down is helpful, but again, not enough to move the needle for sellers. So I think they'll, bring some buyers into the market, but not a whole lot. There's still just a lot of fear in the consumer sentiment right now in terms around home buying and what that'll look like, especially with all the tariffs coming into play. What will be interesting, of course, is how the tariffs will be impacting the big home builders. I know we're starting to see a slowdown in home starts. So some of these developments are still going up like gangbusters right now. And that's really just because they started these developments a couple of years ago. So a lot of these big developers are just too financially deep into it to stop those projects. But what they are going to start doing is slowing the pace of these new developments down, and maybe slowing down in terms of the acquisition of new materials to see, particularly with lumber. I heard lumber could make, or lumber packages for a new home could be going up as much as 20%. And so either it's not like the home builders can dictate too much what those homes are valued at. And so they've already been playing the card of buying the interest rates down. And so they'll have to eat that cost because there won't be much of an option for them to pass it on to the buyers at this point in time. They can try to, but they may be building out an inventory that isn't moving, which is not good for a home builder who's got really big amounts of debt. All right. So this graph is still relatively new. We only got a few data points in here, so it'll start to look better over time. But our property management portfolio here is big enough for us to, start trying to track where each unit count is renting at. So it kind of gives you an idea in terms of average. These are going to be average price points for properties that we've got listed for rent within our portfolio. Seeing things be pretty flat. And in general, things have been pretty flat for the last 12 months, maybe even dropped just a little bit over the last 12 months. Definitely since the middle of 2022, we saw a significant drop. I know I had some of my 2-bedroom apartments that were probably, let's just say, smaller than the, what's listed here as the average. I had some of mine leasing real quick for about $1,200. Now those same apartments are only leasing for about $900. So huge drop in rental rates from probably 2.5 years ago at this point in time. I think we're going to see a little bit more of a drop probably this year. I know there's still some pretty big luxury apartment complexes that are going to be coming online later this year that has to try and get it, or needs to try and figure out a way to absorb some of that rental supply. So if you're a landlord hoping for a big increase in rent this summer, I probably wouldn't count on it. I would, again, kind of like the conversation with the selling side, I would just be trying to get your properties leased as quickly as possible. Holding out for a higher lease rate is just not a good idea. Once the tenants are in place, at that point in time, you can always start working on bumping the rents up and just sort of keeping it at market value as market value starts to increase. All right, cost of owning versus renting. So definitely there are some pros to renting, but in general, the idea of this slide is just chat about the benefits of owning a single family home versus renting. So these numbers are all pulled based off of the February stats. So in terms of your monthly mortgage, this is going to be assuming a 5% down on a median priced home versus an average rental rate. So about $3,500 a month, and that's going to include taxes and insurance. Over 8 years, your all-in cost being about $400,000. And we did try to account for inflation, increases in insurance. We're also accounting for home maintenance in that as well. It's an 8-year period. You can probably anticipate you're going to probably replace most of your kitchen appliances. You may have replaced either a furnace or a water heater or an air conditioner in that amount of time as well as your sort of just general handyman costs. So definitely the cost of owning properties got up in terms of maintenance costs. So we did try to reflect those numbers in here. Anticipating using that appreciation over a pretty long period of time. So not anything crazy in terms of what that number is. Total equity gains being about $245,000 between appreciation and that principal pay down. Total cost of ownership being about 400, net cost of ownership about 158. Versus if you were to have rented during the 8-year period, again, try to account for inflation adjusted numbers over the next 8 years. Cost of renting about 233,000. You do get the added benefit that, of course, the bulk majority of your maintenance is going to be covered by the rental owner, but you're actually still at a net loss of about let's just call it $75,000. Plus, you don't get the tax write-offs, and you don't have that level of home ownership in terms of being able to resell it. So definitely much better to own over renting. That being said, I would say if you're not committed to being somewhere for at least 2, if not 3 years at the moment, I would probably encourage renting. I'd say your net cost on renting is going to be better. So a conversation that we're having a lot with people right now is, Max is talking with people on the selling side, and they're, we're coming at them with realistic market comps. So we don't give people these really high market comps in hopes to win the listing and then beat the sellers up to try and drop the price every week. We try to come at them with a realistic sales price right out of the gate. But the issue we're running into is that the sales price is a lot of times equal to, or maybe, slightly less than what their current mortgage is at. A lot of these VA or low down payment FHA buyers are trying to resell their homes. They're getting PCS orders, they need to deploy, and the numbers unfortunately just don't make sense. So it means that they've got to bring a check to the closing table, do a short sale. So I know I'm doing, I've got a short sale under contract right now. We're having that short sale conversation a lot. Or of course, if a seller's just saying, I don't want to deal with this, I'm done. They usually stop making their payments and just walk away from the property. And that's where we'll eventually see it hit the foreclosure market. So definitely recommend buying if you're not planning to stay in the same home for at least two or 3 years. Kevin, looks like you had a question.
Yeah, or a comment. I think you can spin it the right way, I guess, to convincing folks that why it could be good to be a landlord. So, I've been, like I said, when I first signed on, I've been in the military 20 years. And if you can get the right mindset with folks, I think because I'm trying to do this too. I'm just getting my realtor license here the next few weeks. And I'm trying to think, how would I pitch this to prospective investors and landlords? It's great because there's a lot of military who aren't going to want to buy and they're just going to rent. But if you have that timeline where you can be in it for the long haul, over the course of the long term, it still pays to be a landlord, as long as you can get the mortgage underneath the rent, or as long as you're not going underwater on the rent. I think, if there's a way to take the data behind this and maybe make it pop visually to be able to talk to potential investors, I'd be interested in that.
Well, yeah, and if I were to be honest, I don't want to skew the data and make it look sexy to sell more real estate, if I were to be honest. So a conversation that Matt Beckman, our regional sales manager for our property management division, a conversation he is having with a lot of people right now, especially a lot of these military homeowners who have their PCS orders. They're saying, well, I already talked to Max and his news is bad news. And so then he calls Matt, our regional sales manager for property management, and the rent is less than their mortgage, or maybe break even, but often is less than.
Okay, yeah, that's not a good situation. Yeah, and you're right. You wouldn't want to skew it to try to pump it up, but
yeah, exactly. Now, if somebody's in a good financial position, so let's say if we're talking about VA specifically, a lot of our enlisted folks, this may not be a good option for them, but maybe some of our officers, have the financial ability to eat that cost every month. Which I can tell you, if somebody could buy a home with a VA loan, live there for a few years, and then PCS to their next station, if we were working just off today's numbers, they could have to eat maybe $1,000 or more every month by the time they account for all their holding expenses, their maintenance expenses, the property management costs, etc. Now, certainly they might be able to refinance in a few years when the interest rates come down. That's one way. That's like a lever they can pull to help offset the cash flow and bring that number closer to break even or positive. But let's just for round numbers, let's say they lose $1,000 a year. So I'm sorry, $1,000 a month. So let's say $12,000 a year, but they buy a medium priced home. So let's just say, what is that? What did we say our median is? Already forgot what that median number is about. Let's just say 480, 485. We're just going to say 485. Just pulling a calculator out. So let's say we got 485 and it appreciates, let's just say 2%. Let's just be conservative. If it appreciates 2% in a year, then the net appreciation gain will be 9,700. So appreciation gain of 9,700 minus their 12,000, they're still negative with that. So there's just no real way to provide a pretty picture right now. Now, if they can come in with a much larger down payment, then that's where we're starting to talk seriously. So, like a conversation that I know Max is having with a lot of people who are wanting to invest is let's work the numbers backwards in terms of figuring out what does my down payment have to be in order to break even. And I'd say for single family homes, that number is going to be most of the time somewhere between 40 and 50% down. Really big down payments in order just to break even. Now, that's break even on cash flow. That's not a net break even because you are gaining, again, principal pay down. You've got tax write-offs. You've got your appreciation. But unfortunately, 40 to 50% down is what it's going to take in order to just get the cash flow break even. Multifamilies, on the other hand, that number is going to be less, and VA buyers can get up to a fourplex. So they can buy a house and cottage. So a lot of our VA military members who are married, have kids, they're probably not going to talk their spouse into moving into a fourplex. I've actually helped a few families do that, use their VA loan for a fourplex, but it's very far and few between. Usually, both spouses have to be on board for that game plan to work. Most are going to say, or one of them's going to say, "Heck no, I'm not doing that." So that's where they could buy, a house with a detached cottage. So then that can be a great way to go for those families who still want to dip their toes into being a landlord, help offset that mortgage cost with some rents coming in, but it's still not going to be a net positive. So for just your traditional investor who's trying to break even on a fourplex, you're still looking at having to probably come down with, probably 35, 40% down. The numbers work out a little bit better, but the purchase prices are also usually going to be a little bigger as well. Now, that being said, again, those short sales, there could be some good deals to be had. So I know like the one that I've got under contract right now it's a duplex short sale that, at one point in time was probably selling somewhere in probably about the mid 400s. And now let's just say, since we're not sold yet, I can't share any numbers, but it's tremendously less than where we're at now. And the numbers will bounce back eventually. It's just going to take time to get there. So everything in real estate is cyclical. And again, the numbers will come up. So if you're somebody who can afford to cover those costs for a while, I actually do encourage to still buy rentals. I'm a huge proponent of owning rentals because if my numbers, so kind of going back to my example here, if we're again at 480, or what do we say, 485, and let's say we get up to 2.5% appreciation, then we're actually over that 12,000 mark. Okay, so now we're at a net positive. And the nice thing is that you, as a VA buyer, didn't bring any money to that transaction. You came in $0 down, probably got some seller concessions rolled into that. So as long as you can cover those costs, that's really good. And this is a compounding number. So the next year, if we keep getting that, I think it's statistically, it's about a 2.8% average over a very long period of time. So as long as we keep getting those numbers, and you can get ahead, but you just have to be able to afford that those monthly costs as being a landlord. So unfortunately, the bulk majority of Americans are still living paycheck to paycheck. And so if you're somebody who lives paycheck to paycheck, I would just not become a landlord. That is just, we find that those owners who we manage for are just stressed out all the time. They're always worried about every penny that comes in. And what gets real bad is when they're counting on the, let's just say the March 1st rent to cover the March 1st mortgage payment. You're just setting yourself up for failure right there. So definitely not everybody is meant to be a landlord. All right. Does that help? That was kind of a long-winded answer for you, Kevin, but does that kind of help your thinking a little bit in terms of you getting into the game?
Absolutely. Thanks.
Perfect. In terms of that 30-year break-even analysis, so kind of using those same numbers, your rental rate would have to be at $1,350 a month in order just for the net costs to break even. So still no tax write-offs, no home ownership. And of course, once you get into year 31, you're really losing out renting, because now you're still, well, essentially you're still renting. Whereas in year 31, if you own the home, you'd have that home free and clear. And the only cost you'd have would be your taxes, insurance, and maintenance, which is a fraction of what that typical mortgage cost is right now. Hey, Chris, what's going on?
Hey, thanks, Colin. Appreciate you putting this together. Good to see you guys. Hey, you mentioned about the all the new development happening with these apartment complexes and what's going in downtown, and a lot of it looks like it's going to be luxury. There's even plans for more luxury downtown. I mean, what's your take on that? Beyond, like, what's this going to do for our single family home rentals and all of that? What do you think is going to happen to those things?
So, the bulk majority of the luxury, so nobody's really been buying or building affordable rentals. I think there might be one or two affordable rental complexes that were built in the last few years. And, there was a big, news stream about them just because that's the only thing newsworthy to talk about. Nobody wants to talk about one out of the, 100 luxury apartment complexes that are being built right now, because there's just so many. So, and the reason they're doing that is because that's the only way they can make the numbers work. Well, now that our market has shifted so much, a lot of these developers, what they're doing is they're leasing them up by offering 3 free months of rent, sometimes no security deposit, which means it's $0 to get in the door, to sign a very high monthly rental lease, and usually trying to do it on a 2-year, essentially a 2-year lease commitment. And the reason they do that is that they anticipate the first 12 months is they're just going to have to be doing lease ups all year long. And in the second, essentially second trailing 12 month, you have these really high lease rates that's going to inflate their cap rates and make their new development property look really good on paper. So they can show, oh man, this asset is incredible. The problem with that's going to be is when those leases start to expire, people are going to start looking around and seeing, hey, I can save a ton of money by living, at this complex. And now either they're going to have to keep offering those deals, which is going to totally just devastate their numbers because, in terms of their actual numbers. So if they only show the rent roll, which a lot of times when you're looking at these commercial pro formas, is they tend to only advertise rent roll, which is difficult. Now, if you can get your hands on a true T12 or trailing 12 last 12 months, that helps quite a bit if you're looking at those. But going back to your question in terms of what's going to happen to single families, they've already dropped our single family home rental rates quite a bit. So what happened in 2022 is everything kind of stopped in terms of affordability. And so our single family home rental rates actually stayed up for most of 2022. In our multifamilies, we just started really struggling to get them rented, and we were having to get real aggressive on decreasing the price in the second half of 2022 just to get anyone in, through the front door, because all these developments were going on. 2023, it just continued to trend downwards. 2024 was a little bit more of a trend downwards, kind of a little bit more of a break-even state, I'd say, by the end of the year. And even this year, I'd say we're still kind of from a year-over-year standpoint, about roughly break-even, or about where we were a year ago. So I think the new developments probably aren't going to impact us too much more, just because it's a small percentage of what was coming online. But what did happen, kind of backing up again, the multifamilies got hit really hard first, and then it started trickling into the single families, because especially those first-time single-family home renters that are attempting to go into that, nicer product, if you will, started looking around and saying, you know what, I can live in a multifamily for another year at such a reduced rate. And so where a lot of times we'd have these move-up renters moving from multifamily to single family, they all kind of stayed put. Or the single families that we were renting out, we saw a lot more, multi-family leases, if you will. And I'm not saying, two families going together, but, it might be 4 or 5 individuals all agreeing to rent a single family home together on one single lease, as opposed to, what we used to get is just one guy who could afford a nice single family home and go, rent the whole thing out and just have his whole, his space or her space, if you will. So yeah, I don't anticipate it's going to make a big difference, but that is why I'm also anticipating that we're not going to see an increase up. So it's not going to be increase down or increase up. I know we've got our commercial building that we're going to be redeveloping starting this year on East Fountain Boulevard. There was, I think it was like a 350 unit luxury apartment that was approved by Regional Building and the city that was supposed to be going in there. And those investors pulled out late last year. So they probably already spent, I don't know, maybe more than $250,000 on designs and planning, would be my guess. And they said, you know what, it's just not worth the risk anymore. So the developer pulled out, and I'm sure it'll happen eventually, but it might be several years until that takes shape. So in kind of that, that boom bust graph, if you will, in terms of what looks like a sine wave, we are definitely in the multifamily world on that bust cycle and heading back down to the bottom. So I'm still seeing, again, some coming online only just because they're too far committed to stop. And it makes more sense for them just to finish it out. They've got their construction loan lined up, but it's certainly not helping them, and it's probably going to put them in a bad shape by the time they're actually online.
Yeah,
right.
Chris, if you want to talk more about that too, I have a lot of other thoughts on multifamily here as well. I've been underwriting a lot of different projects recently, so feel free to give me a ring.
Cool.
Thanks, guys.
You bet. All right. Well, this was our March presentation. Any other comments or questions? And just so everyone knows, we do intend on trying to do this the second Thursday at noon every month. Is kind of our game plan for these monthly market updates. It does take us some time to get all this data put together, so we can't do it much sooner, but we're going to try and shoot for always a second Thursday at noon every single month. So Evan, do you have any other comments that see coming in?
Not right now, currently. So
All
I
right.
think we're good. Yeah, thank you for joining.
All right, everyone. Well, thanks for joining us. Hopefully we'll see you back next time. And we'll be curious to see what the data continues to show us.